Should I start, sir? Sir, शुरू करो. Namaskar or Swagat. As India marks its run-up to the 75th Independence Day, and we at Netaji Trust today mark another chapter in the run-up to the 125th anniversary of this great leader. I welcome you all today. जी हाँ, आज बात जय हिंद के नारे की, आज बात आईएनए ट्रस्ट की भी, और आज श्रद्धांजलि उस महान क्रांतिकारी की जिसने हमें एक आजाद भारत दिया. This program would not have been possible without the concerted efforts of our partner FICCI. I thank Secretary General Dr. Dilip Shenoy and of course our digital partners, the Mitro app, Daily Hunt and SNBT. I would also like to thank Suparno Satpathy ji for his continued support on behalf of Brigadier R.S. Chikara, the Chairman, INA Trust. I welcome today as our keynote speaker and chief guest, Shri Hindol Sengupta. Dr. Sengupta is the Vice President of Invest India. As our special guest, Priya Samant Perulkar, who joins us in a virtual mode from US. I'd also like to welcome Dr. J.S. Rajput, Vice Chairman of INA Trust, Mr. Dilip Shenoy, Secretary General FICCI, who will be joining us a little later, and Sudhir ji. Dr. Sudhir Singh is the Secretary General of the INA Trust. But before we begin today's auspicious program of saluting this leader on the occasion of Youth Icon Day, I request the technical team to play Vande Mataram. But before that, I also request our dignitaries to please proceed for lighting of the lamp. Bharat Mata ko naman, ye प्रार्थना hai. O light of exceptional glory, enlighten the darkness of our minds, for dark is the path, and thou holdest the light. और जैसे कि नेताजी ट्रस्ट का प्रतीक है, तो हम वंदे मातरम से फेलिसिटेशन और इन्वोकेशन करेंगे.
वंदे मातरम, वंदे मातरम, सुजला सुफला मलयज शीतला, सस्य श्यामला मातरम, वंदे मातरम, शुभ्रज्योत्स्ना पुलकितयामिनी, पुल्लकुसुमित द्रुमदल शोभिनी, सुहासिनी सुमधुर भाषिणी, सुखदां वरदां मातरं, वन्दे मातरं, वन्दे मातरं.
तो इसके साथ भारत माता को नमन हम सभी का आज इस मंच की ओर से. I would now like to welcome Dr. J.S. Rajput, Vice Chairman of INA Trust, to welcome all of you. So,
esteemed Shri Hindol Sen Gupta, Shri Chenoy of FICCI, Dr. Sudhir Singh, and all the friends and guests who are associated with this program here in this hall and who are connected online. I welcome all of you to this lecture, this celebration, this occasion to remind ourselves of our gratitude to those who gave us a free India. And one of them, the modern monk, I was so impressed that I purchased a couple of copies and distributed to my friends. The way he analyzed the contributions of Swamiji, Swami Vivekananda, was so inspiring and motivating. Now, today he speaks on one of the greatest sons of India, modern India, Netaji. When I was young in 55, 60s in the college, school and university, this is one name that inspired everyone, irrespective of the age. Whether you were a 7-year-old or you were a 70-year-old, Netaji inspired. Everybody wanted to know more and more about Netaji. Whole country was waiting for his arrival. And for a couple of decades, India did it. It was indeed sad that the history of India was written without objectivity, without objective approach, ignoring facts and figures. It is for the generation now. Take an objective view of Indian freedom struggle, the role of various leaders, the sacrifices made by them. How could they inspire and motivate the entire nation? Netaji's life is full of several anecdotes, several facts, courage, inspiration, motivation, and his indomitable spirit to sacrifice everything for the country. That famous slogan, "तुम मुझे खून दो, मैं तुम्हें आजादी दूंगा." This can come only from a heart determined, committed to the nation. And if you are committed to nation, you are committed to the people. On this occasion, let me also mention that I know you give facts and figures to the generations in the schools. With literacy rate of about 80%, you must approach the children that they should know the true history of India. Their history, heritage must be put before them. And who in India is not interested in the history of the freedom struggle? We need young persons, inspired persons, motivated persons, and the way things are coming up are now being revealed how Netaji was primarily responsible for making the Britishers think of leaving India. Now we have the facts, figures, and we hope that with the new education policy, new curricula will be developed, new textbooks shall be prepared, and we shall all insist that Indian history written with objectivity, and our hero, Netaji Subhash Bose, gets his right due in history and in history books and the hearts of the people of India. I welcome Hindolji, Chenoyji, who has always been very helpful. All the program, the FICCI has been of great assistance to the trust, and we hope it will continue in future also. I welcome all of you, and we are in this evening for a wonderful lecture from a scholar of great repute, commitment, devotion. Welcome to Shri Hindol Sen Gupta. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And as you rightly said, we at INA are indeed very, very grateful to FICCI for their unstinted support. और इसी के साथ मैं निवेदन करती हूँ दिलीप शनॉय जी से, सेक्रेटरी जनरल फिकी, कि वो हमसे अपने विचार साझा करें. आपका स्वागत है, सर.
Thank you and a very good evening. Welcome to this very special lecture on the occasion of the 125th celebration, birth anniversary celebrations of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. So it is a pleasure to have with us Shri J.S. Rajput. Thank you for always guiding us, for being there all the time, and also providing your leadership there. So she's saying a very warm welcome from our side, and also later on, Ms. Priya Samant is going to talk about the diaspora role here. So it is a very warm welcome to her as well. But a very, very, very special welcome to Mr. Hindol Sengupta. One of the reasons I never miss, and I always look forward to being here with this, with all of you, and the lovely series of lectures that you organize is, for me, it's a personal learning experience, and the amount of research and work that is done by our esteemed speakers is unparalleled there. Just at the cusp of the impact of the second wave, we had Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian, the Chief Economic Advisor, actually give a very interesting lecture. And I was sitting on the top table and I was getting calls. And at that time, nobody knew the impact. And I was getting calls that hospital beds were not available. Then you get hospitals and you can get medicine. So I apologized to him, and his lecture was so interesting that I had to sit in, but still try and address the calls. But I think the caliber of people, and you reflect the caliber and the amount of research that you have done. So very warm welcome to you from FICCI. We will continue to support this whole, the trust, the whole idea of, as Mr. Rajput said, that, how do we get an objective view of the freedom struggle, the role of leaders who have not been researched and written about, and especially how they actually enabled us to achieve what we now are celebrating this time, the Azadi Ki Amrit Mahotsav, the 75 years of independence as we take it. And, this building, if you walk up, you will see that in 1947, we had Mr. M.A. Master as our president at that point of time. And it is just coincidence that there's a Dilip Chinoy at this point of time being the Secretary General of FICCI. If you relate, there's a commonality in the surname. But again, I don't want to take more of your time. Welcome all of you here. Welcome a very special guest. And then, thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to hearing the great lecture going ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dilip sir. And as you rightly said, as India marks its 75th year of independence, we also celebrate the run-up to the 125th anniversary of this great legendary leader who gave us a free India. Yes, Subhash Chandra Bose. And now, as our keynote speaker, I'm delighted to welcome amidst us Shri Hindol Sengupta. Dr. Sengupta is an award-winning author, a prolific speaker. He's the editor-at-large at Fortune India and the only Indian to have been awarded the Wilbur Award for his book, one that I especially like, Being Hindu, and The Modern Monk, Recasting India, some of the other books. We're very, very grateful that you spared your valuable time to be with us here today, Hindolji. I request you to share your views on the visionary Subhash Chandra Bose. Let's welcome with a spirited applause Dr. Hindol Sengupta, now also the president, the vice president of Invest India.
Namaste, good evening. I'm absolutely delighted and thrilled to be giving this lecture here today, not least because Subhash Chandra Bose, the more you say about him, it seems like it is too little, and indeed too little about him. So I want to pick, there's so much you can talk about Netaji, so much. You can talk about his politics, you can talk about his nationalism, you can talk about his Desh Bhakti. There's no end to the number of subjects that you can pick up and talk about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. But I want to pick up one thing, one element in this lecture and drill down and focus on it, because this is one element which is rarely spoken about and indeed puts his life in context and clears many distortions about his life, his opinions, his true nature, and what he really wanted for India. Netaji's legacy has been hijacked or was hijacked for many. It is time now that we truly look at Netaji in a new light. We rediscover the valor, the confidence, the true nationalistic spirit of Netaji. And as the topic of my lecture today, I want to talk about Subhash Chandra Bose, not merely influenced by Marx, but much more influenced by Swami Vivekananda. This is one aspect that is rarely spoken about when you talk about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. You don't talk about, and nobody talks about, the spirituality of Subhash Chandra Bose, the philosophy of Subhash Chandra Bose, where they came from, what are the roots, and how they manifested throughout his life. Let's begin a generation before Netaji. Netaji's father was not only a very successful lawyer, but he was also a devout man. And indeed, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose discovered the first elements of what could later on be called his inner life through the piety of his parents. Where did the piety come from? Well, it was targeted towards two individuals. And if you look at history, especially history of Bengal, you see an unbroken tradition of philosophy and philosophy manifesting in various ways, connecting people. One of the great problems of Indian history is that we have broken that chain and we see individuals only as individuals. Now, that may have helped certain other political goals. I don't want to get into all that here today. But these individuals were deeply connected. They were part of a thread. They were part of an unbroken thought process. What is that unbroken thought process? Well, very early in life, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was introduced to the life and the divinity of two individuals, seminal people in the sort of latter half of what came later on to be called the Bengal Renaissance. What was the Bengal Renaissance? Well, the Bengal Renaissance, as many of us know, was this flowering, in a sense, of intellectual, spiritual, devotional, and liberal political idealism that emerged from Bengal at a particular period in the 19th and early 20th century. Two seminal figures of this entire period are an unlettered village man called Ramakrishna Paramhans and his chief apostle, Swami Vivekananda. Narendranath Datta, we today know him as Swami Vivekananda. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, early, through familial, the sort of spirit of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. But as a boy, he would have only been introduced to, should I say, the sort of exteriority of the movement around Ramakrishna Paramahansa and Swami Vivekananda. The great thing about Subhash Chandra Bose is that he didn't stop at that point. Subhash Chandra Bose would later on call Swami Vivekananda the maker. Say that. When he was barely about 15, Subhash Chandra Bose, through a relative, begins to discover the writings of Swami Vivekananda. And in the second part of my lecture, then the first part of my lecture, I will tell you how Subhash Chandra Bose got immersed into the worldview of Swami Vivekananda. In the second part of my lecture, you yourself, and I will also guide you, you will connect elements of Netaji's life to showcase that strength and devotion that he takes, in a sense, from these spiritual leaders and applies them in his own personality, his own renunciation, and his own almost yogic ability to fight the British. You see, we never talk about Netaji in these terms. But if you think about it, Netaji's life is an example, is a great example of renunciation. Here is a man born to great wealth. Here is a man whose political, today we would use the word godfather, but political guru, let's say, was an extremely wealthy man, C.R. Das. Netaji himself was born in, if not with a silver spoon in his mouth, but certainly the spoons that he was serving or through which he was being served food were of excellent quality, and the food was perhaps even of better quality. Such was the prosperity in which he was born. But if you look at his life is a life of constant renunciation. Constant renunciation. He's constantly giving up. He gives up his family wealth. He gives up the prestige that his Anglican or English education at that time, colonial education, could have given him. Not from one college, but from two colleges. He gives up. He gives up that coveted position that would allow him, and a student of his academic ability, to rise swiftly in the hierarchy of British India. Gives up the ICS, then proceeds, in a sense, when he disagrees with Gandhi, proceeds to then, in a sense, give up on a political life where he was destined for greatness. There was not a political conflict there, but Subhash Chandra Bose, his life was not merely about shallow political motivation. His life had been infused with the idealism of Vivekananda and the devotion to the idea that before anything else, Bharat Mata must be free. Let me quote, let's go back to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose when he's about 15 years old. He writes, glancing over his books, these are books that carry Swami Vivekananda's writings. I had hardly turned a few pages when I realized that here was something which I had been longing for. I borrowed the books, brought them home, and devoured them. I was thrilled to the marrow of my bones. My headmaster had roused my aesthetic and moral sense. He had given a new impetus to my life, but he had not given me an ideal to which I could give my whole being. That Vivekananda gave me. For days, for months, for weeks, I pored over his works. If you look at Netaji's life, the application, I like to tell my other audiences, and I want to repeat this to you, Netaji's life is the application of Swami Vivekananda's teachings in one of the finest forms possible. It is Vivekananda applied. Vivekananda himself was, of course, his own renunciate lion of philosophy and the Vedanta. But Vivekananda, remember, died very, very young. And Vivekananda wasn't a politician. He was a monk. But if there could be an applied Vivekananda in amidst, not as a monk, but within the political world, fighting the colonial system, battling the hardships of a colonial system, that is Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose is applied Vivekananda. You know, in scientific theory, we say there is a theory and then there's the applied version of the theory. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose is applied Vivekananda. Let's see what else he has to say. He wrote, this is Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. In this task of freeing my mind from superstition, Vivekananda was of great help to me. The religion he preached, including the concept of yoga, was based on a rational philosophy on the Vedanta, and his concept of Vedanta was not antagonistic to, but was based on scientific principles. Whenever you talk about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, one of the things people talk about is how when he brought together the INA, he was totally above, in a sense, petty prejudice. Because petty sectarian prejudice is part and parcel, was and is part and parcel of many aspects of daily Indian life. Netaji was able to rise above all of that. And for people who have read their history, they know that that's why Netaji succeeded in gathering people together where Rash Bihari Bose had failed. Because Netaji was a higher stature of human being. He was above, truly above, the petty sectarian divides that divide our country even today. He truly saw human beings as that individual soul, committed and devoted to the cause of Bharat Mata. To him, what sectarian group you come from had little meaning. He was able to subsume all of that. This rising above superstition he talks about, that Vivekananda allowed him to do. Rise above these superstitions, rise above these divides, bring people together. You see, the interesting thing is, when people talk about this today, often credit is to his interest in Marxism. And Vivekananda himself had some interest. But I would very strongly argue that instead of seeing it in a unipolar dimension, we ought to now see it more holistically and see where his lifelong interest and devotion came from, along with his political interests and ideological fascinations and so on and so forth. No problem. But we must look at the journey holistically. We have all too often looked at the journey in a very narrow band sort of manner. And we must stop doing that today. Again, Netaji, he's a little older now. It's about 17 or so, 17, 18. He writes, in practical life, I was going to emulate Ramakrishna and Vivekananda as far as possible. Of that phase, he wrote, the intellectual doubt that assailed me needed satisfaction, and constituted as I was then, that satisfaction would not have been possible without some rational philosophy. That this philosophy I found in Vivekananda and Ramakrishna, it came nearest to meeting my requirements and offered a basis on which to reconstruct my moral and practical life. It equipped me with certain principles with which to determine my conduct or line of action. Arose before my eyes. There is no ambiguity in these words. He is very clear where his ideas and ideals are coming from. And this idea that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose had an inner life has been very little explored. And I urge people to look at the Netaji papers, life once again, to understand not only the external life of Netaji, but also the inner life of Netaji. And I would strongly argue from this podium today that there is much to learn for all of us from the inner life of Netaji also. Not just his external life. Inner life that powered the external life. Where did he get the confidence? Confidence as a citizen of a colonial go across the world to raise an army. In the same manner that Vivekananda once headed out to the Parliament of Religions without knowing what awaited him. Sheer confidence that the truth that he held within himself would surpass everything else. In Netaji, we see the same spirit. The truth that he has within him surpasses all other hurdles that he might face. And how interesting it is that today, on such a day, when Rajputji just Vivekananda's book that I wrote, know what's happening in Afghanistan. Many of you know that he actually escaped through Afghanistan. So what a fortuitous day to be talking about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Let's take another thing. 1930, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose is writing to his brother. And what is she now? What a terrible change. But there is hope yet. I think there is hope yet. The angel of hope has appeared in our midst to put fire in our soul and shake off our dull sloth. It is the same. His angelic appearance, his large, his sacred dress to preach to the whole world truths did in Hinduism. You read this quote, you cannot but hear the echoes of Vivekananda's arise. You cannot but echoing of Vivekananda that India was glorious at one point. Fallen into disrepair, not least because of colonial rule. But India must rise. That hope is embedded in these words. There is more. In 1914, Subhash Chandra Bose, then only 17 years old, writes to his father. I said, this is part of a note, that Vivekananda's ideal was my ideal. Unambiguous. 29, addressing students, most likely in Chinsura. Again, Netaji. Swami Vivekananda, who had on one hand boldly asked his of fetters, the truest sense of the term, and on the other hand, laid the foundation of true nationalism in India by preaching the essential unity of all religions and sects. Till his dying breath. Which is why Netaji was able to embrace cultures from around the world, including in his own personal life. Devotion was to Bharat Mata. Swami Vivekananda also used to say, his personal life, of course, revolved around his mother. And yet he continued devotion to his family. His true devotion was to the cause of the nation. And for him, of course, the cause of God. Again, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. I cannot write about Vivekananda without going into raptures. Few indeed could comprehend or fathom him. Even among those who had the privilege of becoming intimate with him, his personality was rich. It was this personality, as distinct from his teachings and writings, which accounts for the wonderful influence he has exerted on his countrymen, particularly manhood, which appeals to the Bengali as probably no other, reckless in his sacrifice, unceasing in this activity, boundless in his love, and versatile in his wisdom, exuberant in his emotions, merciless in his attacks, but yet as simple as a child. He was a rare personality in this world of ours. Swamiji harmonized the East and West, religion and science, past and present. That is why he is great. Our countrymen have gained unprecedented self-respect, self-reliance, self-assertion from his teachings. I want to take this together the East and the West, as exemplified by Vivekananda, was shown in a different position by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Through his own life, he showed that the West and the East can indeed come together. Very few people know that with one of when he was again barely about 17, 18, Netaji went to try and find a guru for himself. And that friend with whom he went later on became one of his earliest biographers. This idea of a search of an inner world, an inner self, an inner life pervades Netaji's work. And he finds this in Vivekananda. But we never talk about this today. We haven't spoken about it for more than 70 years now. You see, this is the binding glue. What I'm trying to show to you is, we think, I'm a biographer of Swami, of course, of written on Guru Govind Singh. I am supposed to Subhash Chandra Bose. Is this? All us, we have isolated in bubbles. That they did not, in a sense, have a glue that stretches through them. But the more you discover the truth about them, you realize what is the pervading glue. That's the most interesting thing. Let me tell you a very interesting thing that I discovered while preparing for this lecture. When Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was at Scottish Church, many of you know that he was expelled once, accused of beating up, insulted India. A bit ambiguous, but thrown out. Then he moved from one college to Scottish Church. I discovered during my research that another man devoted to spirituality, who I say in a different paper I'm writing, would have been influenced by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's determined nationalism at Scottish Church, was his junior, a man called Abhay, would go on to create a liberal version together of the Gaudiya Mutt, which we today know as ISKCON. We today know him as Srila Prabhupada. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. This I discovered. When you start to connect these dots, the greatest problem, the greatest sin of our history, ladies and gentlemen, is that these dots have been kept away from our national consciousness. We must now learn to connect these dots to truly understand what makes India. Netaji again, on Vivekananda. He was so great, so profound, so complex, a yogi of the high spiritual level in direct communion with the truth, who had for the time being consecrated his whole life to the moral and spiritual uplift of his nation and humanity. This is how I would describe him. If he had been alive, I would have been at his feet. I want to talk a little bit as we start to wind down this lecture on this idea of what makes an ideal man. You see, this idea of what makes an ideal man is an idea that travels through our entire nationalistic history. People are asking themselves, what makes an ideal man? Right? That, a certain determined, fierce manhood is needed to fight against. And please, leaving aside women, but this is just a word that they're using. A particular kind of determined manhood is needed. One of the first people who spoke about this was Vivekananda. And you find this idea about manhood coming up again in Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. In fact, since Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose has written, and he says that if Vivekananda had been alive, he would have been at his feet. I would like to argue to him, had Swami Vivekananda seen Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, he would have realized that the ideal of manhood that he was talking about was in this young man. The spirit, again, what I began with, theory, application. Theory, application. A monk theorizes, applies in his own life, application in the real world, in politics, in real struggle, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Right? I want to conclude by a couple of ideas that I want to throw at you. And one of the last being, Netaji often, we all know that Gandhiji used to carry the Bhagavad Gita with him. But we barely ever talk about the fact that Netaji too often carried the Bhagavad Gita with him. See, when Netaji and indeed Vivekananda were interested in Marxism, what they were talking about was a more equitable society. Because remember, they saw an extremely divided, extremely oppressed, extremely humiliated and hierarchical society. After all, they were both, in different times, of course, but they were both citizens of a colonial India. So they were looking at that example as a more equitable example. That is the part that they're attracted to. We should not extrapolate that into making it a larger story, because there is a larger story. It's just that we don't know about the larger story. We haven't spent enough time with the larger story. That's the problem. I want to conclude by talking about, this is the first time in public. This has not even been ever announced in public till now, but I have recently completed the translation of Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's Anandamath, from where we get Vande Mataram. And I was most pleased to see that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose mentions Bankim and Anandamath as one of those examples of true nationhood and national devotion from the fierce, determined saints and sadhus who are the heroes of Anandamath, as all of you, of course, know. So this, and of course, his own hero, you have to, as a historian, one learns. That's very, very important. So when you connect these dots, you realize history is not far away from us. History is with us, alive today. After all, the thoughts that we are talking about, that stretches from Bankim's sadhus in Anandamath, fighting oppression, to Vivekananda, the maker of modern India, to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, is reflected in the FICCI auditorium also today, ladies and gentlemen, with the divine image of Bharat Mata. This is how we learn to join the dots. This is how we really learn the vital import of our history. And I want to leave you with this thought that the history we were taught was only one part of our history. Today, there is a Samudra Manthan once again, so that we understand our civilization, our culture, and our history better. Not least because Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose would have really liked us to. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Sheen, for those insights and that absolutely wonderful lecture. We were truly, truly enthralled. On behalf of our chairman, Brigadier R.S. Chikara, I extend a very big thank you to you. And I now request a cap as a token of appreciation to Shri Hindol Sen Gupta. The Netaji cap. So let us all applaud with a spirit. Cap to our keynote speaker today. Jai Hind. Let us celebrate a new India. Thank you so much once again. We learned so much. And the dot. We now bring to you Indian diaspora by our special guest today, who will be joining us online from the United States, Ms. Priya Samant Perulkar, a social entrepreneur, multi-talented professional, who's worked on all presidential campaigns. She's also the founder of Earth Friends. She was a member advisor on tech and innovation policy and still is for Hillary Clinton, and has also worked closely and is working closely with the Biden team. I invite her to share her thoughts about Indian diaspora.
Namaste. My name is Priya Samant and I'm based in the United States of America, my homeland. And I was born and raised in Mumbai, India, my motherland. August 15 reminds us of the sacrifices the freedom fighters have made to secure the country's future. And one such freedom fighter was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, a leader with the vision of a free and independent India with social, economical, and political freedom, along with gender and caste equality. I'm very honored to be present here virtually to celebrate the legacy and vision of Netaji's 125th birth anniversary and celebrating India's 75th Independence Day. I sincerely thank Brigadier R.S. Chikara, Chairman of INA Trust, Ms. Nidhu Kumar, Mr. Abhaya Kashyap, and the Board of Trustees for inviting me to be part of this event. In today's world, where cultural diplomacy and human-to-human connections is of utmost importance, let's draw inspiration from Netaji's work of forming people-to-people's connection and partnerships and building cultural bridges. Thank you very much for having me. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, Priya. To more interaction with you when you come next for the next event in October. I now request the technical team to play Netaji's favorite song, which is the custom of the INA Trust. Kadam kadam badhaye ja, ye zindagi hai kaum ki.
We survive or not, whether we individually live to see India free or not, we are confident that India shall be free.
बढ़ाए जा खुशी के गीत गाए जाए जिंदगी है कौम गीत गाम पे लुटाए जा कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा खुशी के गीत गाए जाए जिंदगी है कौम गीत गाम पे लुटाए जा शेर हिंद आगे बढ़ मुड़ने से तू कभी न डर उड़ा के दुश्मनों का सर जो शेवगन बढ़ाए जा तू शेर हिंद आगे बढ़, मरने से तू कभी न डर, उड़ा के दुश्मनों का सर जो शेवतन बढ़ाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की तो कौम पे लुटाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की तो कौम पे लुटाए जा। चलो दिल्ली पुकार के, कौमी निशान संभाल के, लाल किले पे गाड़ के लहराए जा, लहराए जा। चलो दिल्ली पुकार के, कौमी निशान संभाल के, लाल किले पे गाड़ के लहराए जा, लहराए जा। कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की तो कौम पे लुटाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा।
Those of you who do not know, all the IMA cadets pass out on this धुन, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, और ये जय हिंद का नारा भी हमें नेताजी ने ही दिया है, तो आज फिर से उनको नमन। I now request Dr. Sudhir Singh, Secretary General INA, to present the vote of thanks.
Friends, India is celebrating 125th birth anniversary of Netaji and some other freedom fighters. To celebrate this year, Netaji Trust have planned many things. In this series, this is one of our initial events. And for that, Trust is extremely thankful to Hindol Sen Gupta ji, who has given one of the most marvelous lecture which we have heard recently about the interlinkage between Swami Vivekananda and Netaji. In practice, Netaji was an applied mode of Swami Vivekananda's philosophy. And thanks goes to Priya Sawant also. She has given a new twist to the diasporic Indians who are in United States and other parts of Europe and who have still connected with our new incarnation of India and new vision of India. Our extreme thanks goes to Sri Dilip Chinai ji, Secretary General FICCI, technical team of FICCI, and entire fraternity of FICCI who have been extremely cooperative with us, and we hope that this process will continue. We are extremely thankful to our audience, both online and offline. Majority of the people are online because of prevailing problem of pandemic. We are also thankful to media, both electronic and print one. And we also wish on this August occasion that our chairman, Brigadier Chikara, will get well soon, and he will guide us to sustain our programs in this remaining part of the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And on behalf of Brigadier R.S. Chikara, I thank you all for watching. I would like to thank our keynote speaker today for a wonderful lecture, Dr. Hindol Sen Gupta. I also want to thank Dilip Shenoy ji, Secretary General FICCI, without whose unstinted support this program could not have happened, especially in the unprecedented crisis of the pandemic. I'd also like to thank Mitro, who've always been there ever since we did any program on INA. Thank you to the whole team of Mitro, and especially to the founders, Shivank and Anish. I also wish to thank the Daily Hunt, who have collaborated with FICCI to help us today. Thank you so much. Let us together, you and I, reimagine, reinvent India, an India that Netaji dreamt of. On the run-up to the 75th Independence Day of India. This is our wish and our message. Thank you all once again for watching. Please join us for refreshment. Jai Hind.